Australia. Most people think of Crocodile Dundee, Waltzing Matilda, bush hats and billy cans. It's the home of kangaroos and koalas, a vast continent of dramatic scenery as varied as the people that inhabit the land. Australia's outback, with its arid scenery broken by spinifex bushes and surreal rock formations, is inhabited by dingoes and wallabies. It's been home to the Aborigines for generations. Their secret Dreamtime ceremonies keep alive the ancient traditions of a great catastrophe. Rising like a monolith out of the red desert in the heart of the Australian continent, Ayers Rock is a sacred place for Aborigines. They call the rock Uluru. It's the site of secret initiation rites and animist rituals, a place where ancient traditions are kept alive. In Dreamtime ceremonies, Aborigines recall a time of cataclysmic flooding.
Cruelty provoked the anger of the Great Father. He became very angry and decided to drown the people. The thunder began to roll and crash. There was a terrible wind, and the people were greatly afraid. Then the sea came crashing over the ranges from the north, and the flood rose higher and higher until all the land was covered.
According to the Genesis account, the earth was struck by an immense catastrophe a few thousand years ago, when almost all life was destroyed and the earth was flooded. Only Noah's family and the creatures they saved survived to repopulate the earth. A tour with a difference, looking at evidence of the Genesis flood in Australia.
What the Bible says about the history of the world is true. There was a flood in the days of Noah, a global catastrophic flood.
I don't believe in evolution, I know creation's true.
The reality of a recent global flood was generally accepted until the last century, when an aristocratic British geologist, Sir Charles Lyell, threw out the idea of global catastrophe. Modern geology is founded on Lyell's ideas that slow, gradual changes shape the Earth over millions of years. But the idea of eons of uninterrupted change is under attack by experts around the world. And in Australia, some geologists find clearly written in the rocks the story of recent catastrophe.
The conventional wisdom says that the geological features of Australia form slowly and gradually over millions of years. That is not the case. Indeed, I'm convinced that the evidence is more consistent with what the Bible says about a global catastrophic flood in the recent past. Now, this is not just a matter of faith. This is also a matter of studying the geological evidence.
Uluru is an enigma. It's thought to be millions of years old and formed by gradual processes. But a closer look at the rock suggests it's much more recent and shaped by raging waters.
The thickness of sandstone we see exposed in Uluru, or Ayers Rock itself, is over 2 kilometres thickness of sand. Think of 2 kilometres thickness of sand being moved very rapidly. You're talking about global catastrophic flood conditions. The record in the Bible says that at the end of the flood, the valleys sank, the mountains rose. There were earth movements on a grand scale, so that rock layers would have been tilted up. The retreating floodwaters would have then carved out the countryside. And in the case of Uluru, that monolith that's exposed at the Earth's surface, it survived the ravages of that erosion and stood out today at the present land surface after the waters had fully retreated.
Today, most geologists consider Noah's flood and other flood accounts just ancient myths. But some geologists disagree. Dr. Andrew Snelling, a consultant geologist and research scientist, is editor of Creation Ex Nihilo Technical Journal, published by the Creation Science Foundation. He finds evidence that the biblical flood was a real event, still remembered in the legends of different cultures around the world. The biblical flood model goes against the grain of gradualist dogma. Opposition from skeptics and from anti-religious opponents of the creationist view has been outspoken, sometimes even vicious and libelous.
The conventional wisdom of millions of years of slow and gradual geological processes cannot explain the features that we see here in Australia.
Uluru is made of arkose, a type of sandstone containing quartz and feldspar, which quickly weathers and decomposes to form clay. A red coating of iron oxide doesn't protect it from weathering. If it was really millions of years old, it should have entirely crumbled away by now.
The fact that such feldspar crystals, they're still fresh and shiny, that indicates that they couldn't have been around for the claimed millions of years that the conventional ideas suggest.
The problem with the classical model is that every geologist knows that feldspars weather and round fairly rapidly, despite the fact that it's been purportedly exposed to weathering for hundreds of millions of years. Is still very fresh, as though it was exposed only yesterday.
Evidence in the rocks of a cataclysmic flood convinced Philip Honan that the Genesis account of Noah's flood is a record of a real event in recent history.
The real evidence fits the creation model much better than it fits the evolutionary model, the slow and steady model. The Bible tells us the whole of the earth was encompassed by water for a period of about a year. And you can imagine the forces that this body of water would have unleashed, and it would have completely denuded the whole face of the earth as it then was, and completely reshaped that earth.
Throughout Australia, there are extensive deposits of sedimentary rock that were laid down by water. Did the rocks form gradually, as conventional geology claims, or does the evidence suggest a cataclysmic flood?
We know what floods can do. You know, floods of only a few tens of metres of depth can absolutely annihilate cities. And so what could a body of water 3+ kilometres deep achieve? And it could literally erase mountains and create new ones. And it could move massive bodies of sediment in a very short time, very rapid erosion. I believe that the present shape of Ayers Rock could have been achieved very rapidly, as recently in just a few thousand years.
With the slow and gradual ideas for the formation of the sandstone at Ayers Rock, with the sand being transported long distance, there would have been enough time and distance for the sand grains to be rounded, smoothed, and the jagged edges knocked off, and also the material to be sorted, the grains to be sorted into layers of different grain sizes. You don't see that in this sandstone at Ayers Rock. You see a mixture, which means the process had to be very rapid, catastrophic, picking up the material and transporting it very rapidly. And that had to be very recently, otherwise those feldspars would have been weathered away to clay. And when you consider that all that had to form catastrophically, and suddenly to get the mixture of grains and those feldspars staying fresh, you're talking about catastrophic flood conditions.
Close to Uluru is another enigmatic formation of rocks, Catatuta, the Olgas, the tilted and eroded tip of a massive layer of conglomerate. Huge rocks, unsorted and cemented together by sand, mostly hidden beneath the earth. It extends for more than 6 kilometers below the ground and for tens of kilometers on each side. To some, this vast layer of water-transported boulders speaks of a time when the Australian continent was swept by raging waters.
At the same time as the sandstone at Ayers Rock was uplifted, the other sediments throughout Central Australia were also tilted up and folded. And these sediments show all the evidence of catastrophic deposition underwater.
In the heart of Central Australia, there's another geological puzzle, the McDonnell Ranges, eroded, jagged mountains made of strata tipped up on their sides. Geologists think the McDonnells were once as high as the Canadian Rockies, formed when sediment filled a vast basin and hardened into rock, which was later uplifted and distorted. But how could so much sediment build up in the heart of a stable continent? And how could hard rock become twisted and turned on its side?
To some geologists, the sheer slabs of rock rising in precipitous cliffs and gorges, flanked with contorted sedimentary deposits, speak not of millions of years of gradual geological change, but of recent catastrophe.
The flood model explains much better the folding and tilting of these rock layers, because during the flood, the sediments would have been still plastic and soft while they were still wet. And with earth movements at the close of the flood while they were still soft, they would be much more easily bent and twisted. As the waters retreated, the rock units then dry out and they harden into the shapes that we see now exposed at the Earth's surface.
Fossilized ripple marks in a cave high above Ellery Creek are hard to explain by slow and gradual processes. If the ripple marks had not fossilized rapidly, they would have disappeared.
This is totally consistent with a catastrophic flood. Another location in the outback of Australia is the Flinders Ranges, where we also find fossils such as archaeocyathids that are related to the modern sponges. These are creatures that would have lived on the bottom of the ocean, and therefore this implies that these were buried by sediment on the ocean floor.
These are the archaeocyaths. If you just see that round one in there, that would be the cross-section. It's a clear description of a massive flood in that right from the creek bed right to the top of this range, each rock and each boulder, every bit of this material is chock-a-block full of the archaeocyaths.
At Lark Quarry near Winton, the fossilized footprints of about 300 small dinosaurs have been discovered.
Here we would have had dinosaurs that were grazing as the flood waters were rising. The dinosaurs then scurry away from danger, not only the danger of the dinosaur chasing them, but also the rising flood waters. They leave their footprints in the soft sediments that are accumulating. Once they have gone, the flood covers in with more sediments those footprints to fossilise them so that we can now see them today.
Many a fortune has been made and lost in the wild west of the opal fields of Australia, where some of the most magnificent gems in the world are found.
Now, the conventional wisdom says that opals take a long time to form because the chemical process of crystallisation is supposedly slow and gradual.
Gradualist geologists believe true opals formed slowly over millions of years, but local Aboriginal legends say opals were formed during a great flood. Len Cram, an opal miner at Lightning Ridge, is a self-taught bush scientist who left school at 15 but earned a doctorate for his research on opals.
Now, I believe that opal grew very quickly under the correct circumstances, but Once it got to a gel stage, I think it took hundreds of years to harden up. See, opal goes hard underwater. Natural opal all went hard while it was still wet.
Len Cram believes that natural opals formed rapidly as sediment was deposited in a worldwide flood. In a dusty wooden shed in his backyard, he began experimenting by trial and error until he discovered how to grow opals by a process of ion exchange using electrolytes and silica. As he mixes his brew in rows of bottles, the first flash of color appears within minutes.
And here, now they take 3 months to grow. 3 months to complete that growth in those bottles.
This chemical process can be extremely rapid. Opals can be produced in the laboratory